$4 billion. That's what Amazon paid just for the rights to slap Tolkien's name on a TV show. Add another $465 million to actually shoot season 1, and after all that, season 2 lost 60% of its audience. 60%. Only 37 out of every 100 people who hit play on episode 1 bothered to stick around for the finale. And what's Amazon doing with that information? Greenlighting season 4, before season 3 has even hit your screen. Hey, it's Rick, and welcome back to FilmFlop, the channel where we watch Hollywood set money on fire so you don't have to. Today we've got two stories that perfectly sum up how batshit the entertainment industry has gotten in 2026. One is about a fantasy show nobody's watching that refuses to die. The other is about 3 sentences on a podcast that somehow became the biggest culture war of the summer. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Hollywood keeps making the same mistakes over and over, and why nobody up top seems to care. Let's start with the Rings of Power, because the math on this thing is genuinely insane. We're talking over $1 billion total dumped into a show that most casual viewers can't even follow. Amazon's official line is that the show is a smash hit. They love throwing around the number like 185 million viewers. Cool number. Except independent ratings trackers tell a completely different story. Season 2's audience collapsed by 60% compared to season 1. And retention was already garbage to begin with. Only 37% of the people who watched episode 1 made it all the way to the end of the season. So why keep pouring money into a black hole? Here's the part they don't put in the press release. Amazon's contract with the Tolkien estate has a cancellation penalty. Miss a season out of the planned 5, and Amazon owes the estate $20 million per missed season, just as a sorry, never mind fee. So the accountants apparently ran the numbers and decided it's cheaper to keep making a show nobody's finishing than to pay the fine for admitting defeat. But if you ask me, that's not the whole story either, because the real skill the Rings of Power team has mastered over the last few years isn't fantasy storytelling. It's convincing a $1 trillion company to keep funding a project that keeps hemorrhaging viewers. Peter Friedlender, the head of Prime Video's TV division, reportedly showed up on set personally during season 3 production just to reassure everyone this thing still has a future. Meanwhile, the show keeps making the exact same mistake, season after season, greenlighting the next season before the current one even airs, which means zero time to learn from audience feedback and fix what's broken. And there's a bigger picture here too. Amazon clearly wants to go head-to-head with Warner Bros. For control of the Lord of the Rings universe, and Warner Bros. Is already lining up multiple new Tolkien projects of their own. So Bezos' empire basically has to keep churning out Rings of Power content no matter how bad the numbers look, just so nobody can say Amazon dropped out of the race. It's rich people logic. Keep flushing hundreds of millions down the drain because the alternative, actually admitting the show isn't working, costs more in ego than in dollars. Alright, that's disaster number 1. But here's the thing about 2026. Sometimes the biggest meltdown of the week doesn't cost $1 billion. Sometimes it's just one guy talking on a podcast for 40 seconds. And that's exactly what happened next. If you told people 20 years ago that men crying would become one of the most explosive topics on the internet, they'd have laughed you out of the room. But here we are. Actor Elliot Page sat down on the It's Open with Ilana Glazer podcast to talk about his documentary on animal behavior, and somehow the conversation drifted into what healthy masculinity actually means. Page's answer? Real men shouldn't feel pressure to shut their emotions down. Sometimes healthy masculinity just means letting yourself have a good cry, drink some water, get some sleep, love yourself a little. Read that back and it honestly sounds pretty harmless, right? Except within about 6 hours, half of the internet had turned it into a meme and the other half had turned it into a manifesto. Conservative commentators tore the clip apart, arguing that a guy who transitioned a few years ago has no business lecturing millions of men on what masculinity should look like. Progressive commentators went the other direction, praising Page as exactly the kind of emotionally open man pop culture needs more of. And just like that, one podcast clip became a full-blown internet war. And we'll break down exactly why both sides actually have a point, right after this. Here's what makes this fight more interesting than your average Twitter pile-on. Both sides are working from a real point, even if the internet strips out all the nuance. The skeptic's argument isn't as unreasonable as it sounds on the surface. Page spent the first 3 decades of his life living, working, and building a career as a woman, becoming famous playing female characters before transitioning a few years back. So when he steps in front of millions of people to lay down the rules of healthy masculinity, a chunk of the audience is going to ask, how much authority does that experience actually carry? To them, it looks less like insight and more like rewriting the rulebook to fit a personal journey, dressing up emotional vulnerability as some kind of breakthrough for men everywhere. But zoom out and the other side of the argument holds up too, because let's be honest, the old-school "man don't cry" script was never exactly healthy to begin with. Even in the most macho action movies of the 80s and 90s, guys only got permission to break down when the stakes were apocalyptic. Stallone loses it at the end of Rambo, but only because he's got full-blown PTSD. Tony Stark or Wolverine might shed one single manly tear, but only while the universe is literally ending. Basically, crying was allowed, but only if a skyscraper was collapsing in the background. So yeah, the culture is shifting, and a lot of that shift is generational. What played as strength for older audiences reads as emotionally stunted to plenty of younger viewers, who grew up watching the stoic, tough guy archetype as more of a warning sign than a role model. So where does the truth land? Probably somewhere in the middle, like it usually does. Page's comments deserve some healthy skepticism given the obvious irony of the situation, no argument there. But the pearl clutching over "real men don't cry" isn't holding up too well either. Maybe healthy masculinity isn't about performing tears on camera for internet points, and it's also not about white-knuckling your way to a heart attack just to keep a stoic image intact. Two completely different stories, a billion-dollar fantasy flop and a 40-second podcast clip. But honestly, they're both proof of the same thing. Hollywood and pop culture in 2026 will burn insane amounts of money and attention on things that, if you actually stop and think about them for 5 seconds, really shouldn't be this big a deal. Alright, that's it for today's shit show roundup. Which one do you think is dumber? Amazon greenlighting a 4th season nobody's asking for, or the entire internet losing its mind over 40 seconds of a podcast? Drop your take in the comments. Hit subscribe if you want more of Hollywood's finest disasters, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Rick, signing off from FilmFlop.